On a Tuesday night, in front of 300 of the richest families in town, a woman I had never met looked straight at me from the stage and said she would pay $500,000 if I could make her mute son laugh. Then she pointed at me, the school janitor standing at the back in a dirty work shirt, and smiled like it was a joke. The entire room laughed. My 8-year-old daughter was standing right behind me. She heard every word. She saw them laugh at her father. That night, something inside me broke. My name is Daniel Whitaker. I clean that school every night and raise my daughter alone. What that woman didn't know was that her son hadn't just stopped speaking. He had watched his father get murdered right in front of him 2 years ago. And despite spending a fortune on doctors and therapists, nothing had worked. She also didn't know that the person who might actually reach him was the same man she had just laughed at in front of everyone. A school janitor with nothing but an old $2 yo-yo. The ending of this story changed everything. Before we get there, take a quick second to join the community by hitting subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. I was mopping the long, empty hallway of the school when I heard the sound of loud applause coming from the auditorium. It was already past 10 at night, and the sharp smell of floor cleaner still lingered in the air, mixing with the faint scent of old wood and dust. My back ached from hours of bending and scrubbing, and my hands were raw from the cold water and cheap soap. Sophia was sleeping on an old wooden bench in the staff room because I couldn't afford to leave her alone at home again. I had covered her with my jacket and hoped she wouldn't wake up before I finished. I quietly pushed open the auditorium door just enough to see what was happening inside. Under the bright stage lights stood Emma Calloway, looking powerful and untouchable in her expensive dress. She smiled as she spoke to the crowd of rich parents and donors, announcing that she would pay $500,000 to anyone who could make her mute 7-year-old son laugh again. The room went quiet for a moment before breaking into excited whispers. Then her eyes moved across the back of the hall and landed on me. With a cold, almost amused smile, she pointed straight in my direction and said, "What about you, janitor? You clean this school every night. Maybe you can clean up whatever's wrong with my son, too. Make him laugh, and I'll secure your daughter's future." The entire hall erupted into loud, mocking laughter. It wasn't just a few chuckles. It was real, open laughter, the kind that fills a room and makes you feel smaller than you already are. I felt my face burn as I stood there in my faded work clothes, holding a dirty mop, while people in suits and expensive watches laughed at me like I was part of the evening's entertainment. When I turned around, Sophia was standing right behind me. She had woken up and come looking for me. She was holding her small notebook against her chest, and her eyes were wide with fear and confusion. She had heard everything. She had seen her father being laughed at in front of a room full of rich people who didn't even know our names. I didn't say anything. I just gently took her hand and walked her back to the staff room. That night, after she fell asleep again, I sat alone on a chair in the dark hallway with the mop resting against the wall. The lights were dim, and the strong smell of cleaning liquid still hung in the air. I kept hearing their laughter in my head over and over again. For the first time in years, something deep inside me cracked. Not loudly, but quietly, like something that had been holding on for too long had finally given way under the weight of shame and a quiet, burning rage. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emma Calloway standing on that stage with that cold smile on her face, and I heard the loud laughter of the entire hall echoing in my head. The room was dark and quiet, but my mind wouldn't stop replaying the moment. I could still feel the burn of shame on my skin, the way their laughter had made me feel small and worthless in front of my own daughter. I turned over in bed again and again, but the sound of that laughter kept coming back, louder each time. Sophia asked me the next morning in a small voice if the rich lady was really going to give us money. She was sitting at the small kitchen table, still in her pajamas, pushing her cereal around with her spoon. She didn't look at me when she asked, and I could tell she was trying to sound casual, but I knew her too well. I lied and told her it was just a joke, but I was lying to myself more than I was lying to her. I smiled and said the lady was probably just trying to be funny in front of her rich friends, that nobody was actually going to give us any money. Sophia nodded slowly, but I could see she didn't fully believe me. She went back to eating her cereal without another word, and I stood there at the counter, staring into my coffee, feeling like the worst kind of father for giving her false hope, while knowing deep down that part of me was already considering the offer. Sully warned me the next day that rich people like Emma never make such offers without expecting something in return. We were standing behind the school during our break, the morning sun already hot on our backs. He lit a cigarette and looked at me with that serious, tired expression he got whenever he was trying to protect me from something. He said people like her didn't hand out $500,000 for nothing, and that whatever she was really after, it wouldn't be simple or clean. I listened to him without saying much, but his words stayed with me long after our break ended. Still, every time I looked at Sophia, I thought about her future and the medical bills that kept growing. I watched her sit quietly in the corner of the staff room after school, doing her homework with that same tired look in her eyes. I thought about the doctor's last visit, about the new tests they wanted to run, and about how much it would all cost. I thought about how small our life had become, how every month felt like we were barely staying above water. And no matter how many times I tried to push Emma Calloway's offer out of my mind, it kept coming back. I decided I would meet Emma once and see the boy, nothing more. I told myself it was just to understand what I was dealing with, just to look the situation in the eye before walking away. I didn't plan on getting involved. I didn't plan on letting any of it touch me or my daughter. But even as I made that decision, a quiet voice in the back of my mind was already warning me that this wasn't going to be as simple as I wanted it to be. Deep down, I already knew this decision was going to pull me into something far more painful than I could imagine. I could feel it in the way my chest tightened every time I thought about that cold smile on Emma's face. I could feel it in the way Sophia had looked at me that morning, with that small, quiet hope in her eyes. And even though I kept telling myself I was only going to meet her once, part of me already understood that some doors, once opened, are very hard to close again. When I first met Liam, he was sitting alone in a massive, expensive room, staring at the floor. The house was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like even the walls were holding their breath. Emma had led me through wide hallways and past expensive furniture that looked like it had never been touched. When we reached the room, she stopped at the door and simply nodded toward the boy before stepping back, as if she didn't want to be too close to whatever was happening inside. Emma told me he had stopped speaking after he witnessed his father being murdered 2 years ago. She said it plainly, without emotion, but I could hear the weight behind her words. Liam had been in the car with his father that day. He had seen everything. Since then, he hadn't spoken a single word, and he rarely showed any reaction to the people around him. She had taken him to doctors, therapists, and specialists, but nothing had worked. The money she was offering wasn't just about making him laugh. It was about bringing her son back from wherever he had gone inside his own mind. He didn't react to anything I said or did. I sat a few feet away from him and spoke softly, telling him my name and why I was there. I even tried showing him a small trick with a coin I sometimes did for Sophia. He didn't look up. He just kept moving his fingers in small, repetitive motions against the fabric of the couch, like he was tracing something only he could see. It was as if the world around him had become too loud, too dangerous, and the only safe place left was inside his own silence. The house was cold and silent despite its size. I had never felt so out of place in my life. Everything around me looked perfect. The polished floors, the expensive paintings, the carefully arranged furniture. But there was no warmth in any of it. It felt more like a museum than a home. I kept thinking about my own small house, with its creaky floors and the smell of coffee in the mornings, and how even in our struggles, there had always been some kind of life in those walls. Here, there was only silence and expensive things that didn't seem to bring anyone any comfort. But what stayed with me was the emptiness in Liam's eyes. It wasn't just silence. It was the silence of a child carrying unbearable pain. There was no light in them, no curiosity, no anger even. Just a deep, heavy stillness, like something inside him had shut down to protect whatever was left. I had seen pain before. I had seen it in Olivia's eyes on the nights she missed her mother. But this was different. This was the kind of pain that had taken root so deeply that the boy had stopped trying to fight it. I went home that night thinking about Liam more than the money being offered. As I drove through the quiet streets, I kept seeing his small hands moving against the couch and those empty eyes that looked at nothing. For the first time, I understood why Emma was so desperate. This wasn't about pride or showing off her money. This was about a mother who had watched her son disappear inside himself and was willing to do anything to bring him back. And as I parked my old truck outside our small house and sat there for a moment in the dark, I realized that whatever this was becoming, it was no longer just about money. It was about something much heavier and much harder to walk away from. After several visits to that cold, expensive house, I decided to bring something with me that I hadn't touched in years. It was my father's old yo-yo, a cheap plastic one that had cost maybe $2 when he bought it for me as a boy. I had kept it all these years, tucked away in a drawer, not because it had any real value, but because it was one of the few things I still had that belonged to him. I didn't tell Emma I was bringing it. I didn't even know if it would make any difference. But something told me that words and questions weren't going to reach Liam. Maybe something simpler would. I sat a little away from him on the floor, keeping some distance so he wouldn't feel pressured. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional creak of the expensive wooden floors. I started doing simple tricks with the yo-yo. Nothing fancy, just the basic up and down motion, then the slow walk across the floor. I didn't look at him directly. I just focused on the toy in my hands, letting the strings spin and the plastic spin in quiet, steady rhythm. I wasn't trying to entertain him. I was just giving him something to watch if he wanted to. For many days, he showed no reaction at all. He would sit in the same spot, his fingers moving in those small, repetitive patterns against his leg, his eyes fixed on nothing. I kept coming back, kept bringing the yo-yo, and kept doing the same simple tricks without expecting anything in return. Some days I wondered if I was wasting my time, if this boy was too far gone for something as ordinary as a cheap toy to reach him. But I kept coming anyway, because walking away felt worse than staying and trying. Then, one afternoon, something changed. As I was doing a slow, steady up and down motion with the yo-yo, I noticed Liam's eyes following it. It wasn't much at first, just a slight shift in his gaze. But then, for a few short seconds, the corner of his mouth lifted into a small, almost invisible smile. It was gone as quickly as it came, but I saw it. For the first time since I had met him, there was a flicker of something alive behind those empty eyes. Emma was standing at the door when it happened. I hadn't noticed her come in. She must have been watching quietly from the hallway. Her expression changed completely for a few seconds. The cold, controlled look she always wore cracked, and I saw something raw and unguarded in her face. It was only for a moment, but it was enough. She looked like someone who had been holding her breath for a very long time and had finally been given a reason to exhale. She quickly tried to hide it. She straightened her posture, cleared her throat softly, and walked into the room as if nothing important had happened. She asked me how the session was going in that same cool, distant voice she always used. But I had already seen the crack in her armor. I had seen the way her eyes had softened when she looked at her son, even if it was only for a few seconds. That tiny smile from Liam affected me more than I expected. I didn't feel proud or victorious. Instead, I felt something heavier settle in my chest. It made me realize how deep his silence really went, and how much pain must have been buried underneath it for even a small smile to feel like such a big moment. It also made me understand that whatever this was turning into, it wasn't going to be simple or quick. I realized then that this was going to be far more difficult and painful than I had thought. This wasn't just about earning money or proving something to Emma. This was about a boy who had lost his voice, and a mother who was slowly breaking under the weight of her own guilt. And as I drove home that evening with the old yo-yo resting on the passenger seat beside me, I knew that walking away now would be harder than staying. Something had started between all of us, and I wasn't sure anymore if I had the strength to see it through to the end. After Liam showed that small, almost invisible smile, something shifted in the room. Emma had been watching from the doorway, and the moment she saw her son's face change, even for just a few seconds, she moved quickly. She stepped inside with her usual confident stride and, right in front of two of her staff members who had come in with some papers, she turned to me and offered a large cash bonus on top of everything else we had discussed. Her voice was calm and businesslike, as if she was simply closing a deal that had gone better than expected. I refused the money right there without hesitation. The words came out before I even had time to think about them. I told her I didn't want the bonus, and I said it clearly enough for everyone in the room to hear. One of the staff members looked surprised, and the other one shifted uncomfortably, probably wondering if they had heard me correctly. Emma's expression didn't change at first, but I could see something flicker behind her eyes. I looked her straight in the eye and reminded her how she had publicly humiliated me and my daughter at the school event. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply told her that I remembered the way she had pointed at me in front of all those rich people, and how they had laughed like it was the funniest thing they had seen all night. I told her that Sophia had been standing right behind me and had seen the whole thing. I said I wasn't going to forget that moment anytime soon, no matter how much money was being offered now. She laughed at first, a short, sharp laugh that didn't reach her eyes. She probably thought I was playing some kind of humble game, trying to act noble so she would offer even more. But when I didn't laugh with her and didn't look away, her smile slowly faded. She studied my face for a moment, as if she was trying to figure out whether I was serious or just trying to negotiate a better deal. I told her calmly that I would try to help Liam, but I would never accept any form of humiliation as part of the deal. I said it plainly, without anger, but with a quiet firmness that left no room for misunderstanding. I told her that if we were going to continue, it would have to be on terms that didn't involve me or my daughter being looked down on or laughed at. I wasn't there to be her entertainment or her project. I was there because a boy needed help, and because I understood what it felt like to watch someone you love disappear inside their own pain. This was the first time someone had spoken to her so directly without fear. I could see it in the way her posture changed, even if only slightly. The confident, untouchable woman who had laughed at me in front of a room full of rich people was suddenly faced with someone who wasn't impressed by her money or her power. She didn't say anything for a long moment. The staff members stood awkwardly near the door, unsure whether they should stay or leave. Emma left the room visibly shaken and silent. She didn't argue or try to push the money on me again. She simply nodded once, almost to herself, and walked out without another word. Her staff followed her quietly, leaving me alone in the large room with the faint sound of the air conditioning humming above. I stood there for a while after she left, still holding the old yo-yo in my hand, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over me. Something had changed between us in that moment, and I knew that whatever came next, it was no longer going to be simple or easy. Emma started coming to the school more often after that day. At first, she gave weak excuses about wanting to check on Liam's progress or make sure he was settling in during the visits. She would show up in the late afternoons, sometimes with a file in her hand, sometimes with nothing at all, and she would linger near the staff room or the quiet corner where Liam usually sat. I could tell she was trying to keep some distance, but her visits became more frequent than she probably intended. She saw how I balanced my job with taking care of Sophia every single day. She watched from a distance as I finished my shift, then walked over to Sophia, who was always waiting quietly with her books or drawings. I would help her with her homework, make sure she had eaten something, and sometimes just sit with her when she looked tired. It wasn't anything dramatic or loud. It was just the quiet, steady way I had been living for years. But Emma noticed. I could feel her watching us, even when she tried to act like she wasn't. One evening she saw Sophia quietly comforting me after a long and exhausting shift. I had been on my feet since early morning, and by the time I finished cleaning the last hallway, my body felt heavy and my mind was tired. I sat down on one of the old benches near the back exit, rubbing my face with both hands. Sophia came over without saying a word. She simply climbed up beside me and rested her small head against my arm. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just stayed there, offering the only comfort she knew how to give. For the first time, she saw the real weight and exhaustion I carried every day. Emma had been standing near the end of the hallway, probably on her way out after visiting Liam. She stopped when she saw us. I didn't notice her at first, but when I finally looked up, I caught the way she was looking at me. There was no coldness in her eyes this time, no superior smile. Just quiet observation, like she was seeing something she hadn't expected to find. She quietly offered to help with Sophia's future education and medical needs. Later that same evening, after Sophia had fallen asleep on the bench, Emma came over and spoke to me in a low voice. She said she could arrange for better medical care and help with school expenses if I wanted. She didn't make it sound like a big deal. She kept her tone even and professional, but I could hear something softer underneath it. I refused, saying I didn't want her pity or charity. I told her that I had been taking care of Sophia on my own for a long time, and that I wasn't looking for anyone to step in and fix things for me. I said it calmly, without anger, but I made sure she understood that I wasn't interested in being anyone's project or responsibility. I had my pride, and more than that, I had my daughter to think about. My refusal seemed to affect her more deeply than I expected. She didn't argue or try to convince me. She simply stood there for a long moment, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was something in her eyes that looked almost tired, almost sad. She didn't say anything else. She just nodded slowly and walked away, leaving me sitting there in the quiet hallway with Sophia still sleeping beside me. While spending time with Liam, I slowly began to understand that his silence ran much deeper than I had first thought. It wasn't just that he had stopped speaking. There was something heavier underneath it, something that made him pull away from almost everything around him. The more days I spent sitting quietly in that large, cold room with him, the more I started to see the patterns in his behavior. He didn't just avoid talking. He avoided connection itself, as if letting anyone get too close would somehow put him in danger again. He wasn't just mute. He was terrified of forming any new emotional connection. Every time I tried to speak to him or show him something, he would retreat further into himself. His small hands would move in those repetitive motions, and his eyes would go blank, like he had learned that the safest thing he could do was disappear inside his own mind. I had seen fear before, but this was different. This was the kind of fear that had taken root so deeply that even kindness felt threatening to him. When I gently brought this up with Emma one evening, she broke down in front of me for the first time. We were standing near the large windows in the living room after Liam had fallen asleep. I spoke carefully, telling her what I had noticed and how it seemed like Liam wasn't just silent, but scared of letting anyone in. She stood very still at first, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Then, without warning, her shoulders started to shake. She turned her face away, but it was too late. The tears came quietly at first, then heavier, until she had to sit down on the edge of the couch. She admitted that she had thrown herself into work after her husband's death to avoid feeling the pain. Her voice was low and unsteady as she spoke. She told me how she had buried herself in meetings, deals, and long nights at the office because it was easier than coming home to a house that felt empty and a son who no longer spoke. She said she had convinced herself that staying busy was the same as being strong, and that if she worked hard enough, maybe she wouldn't have to feel how much she had lost. I shared my own story of losing my wife and how I had emotionally shut down since then. I told her about the nights I sat alone in the dark after Sophia had fallen asleep, feeling like a part of me had died along with my wife. I told her how I had learned to keep moving, to keep working, and to keep smiling for my daughter, even when I felt completely hollow inside. I didn't try to make it sound noble. I just told her the truth. For the first time, we spoke as two broken parents, instead of CEO and janitor. There was no power play between us, no cold distance, and no careful politeness. We were just two people who had both lost someone they loved and were trying, in our own ways, to keep going for the children who still needed us. The large room felt smaller in that moment, and the expensive furniture and polished floors no longer seemed to matter. Emma began spending more time at the school after that night. She would come in the late afternoons, sometimes with papers in her hand, sometimes without any real reason at all. She would sit near Liam for a while, speak to him in a quiet voice, and even try to engage with Sophia when she was around. But there was always a careful limit to how close she allowed herself to get. It was as if she was testing the waters, but ready to pull back the moment things started to feel too real. She would interact with Liam and Sophia, then suddenly pull back whenever she felt herself getting too close. One moment she would be sitting with them, listening to Sophia talk about her drawings or watching Liam play with the yo-yo, and the next she would stand up abruptly, make some excuse about a meeting or a phone call, and leave. I noticed the pattern after a while. It wasn't rudeness, it was fear. She was afraid of letting herself care too much, afraid of what might happen if she allowed these quiet moments to become something more. Emma was constantly fighting her own walls. Sometimes I would catch her looking at Liam with genuine tenderness, only for her to quickly look away and put her cold mask back on. Other times, while watching Sophia and me together, something would soften in her face before she caught herself and straightened up again. She wanted to let her guard down, but seemed afraid of what that would expose. One night, while we sat on the bench behind the school, she asked me in a quiet, hesitant voice how I managed to keep going after losing my wife. For the first time, she listened without judgment or sarcasm as I told her about the long, empty nights, and how I had forced myself to keep moving for Sophia's sake. She didn't interrupt or offer advice. She simply listened. Still, I kept my guard up. I had seen too many people show kindness only when it was convenient for them. I answered her honestly, but didn't let her in completely. I wasn't ready to trust that her change was real. Something quiet and unexpected was slowly growing between us, even though both of us were afraid of it. It wasn't loud or obvious. It was in the way she stayed a little longer each time she visited, in the way she looked at Sophia with something close to gentleness, and in the way she sometimes looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Neither of us said anything about it. We just kept moving forward, slowly and carefully, both of us carrying our own fears and neither of us quite ready to name what was happening between us. Liam had a major emotional breakdown one evening, and it happened so suddenly that it caught all of us off guard. We had been making slow but steady progress for weeks. He had started reacting more to the yo-yo, and there were even moments when he seemed almost present. But that night, something inside him snapped. He stopped responding completely. His face went blank, his body became still, and no matter what I said or did, he wouldn't look at me. It was as if he had retreated so far into himself that nothing from the outside world could reach him anymore. He stopped reacting to the yo-yo and refused to come out of his room for days. Every morning I would arrive and sit outside his door, speaking softly through the closed door, telling him about my day or describing simple things I thought might interest him. Sometimes I would bring the yo-yo and let it spin quietly on the floor near his door, hoping the sound might draw him out. But there was nothing. No movement, no sound from inside the room. Just a heavy, painful silence that seemed to grow thicker with each passing day. Emma was devastated and blamed herself for not being a better mother. I saw it in the way her shoulders slumped when she looked at his closed door, and in the way her voice cracked when she spoke to me. She kept saying that she should have done more, that she should have been there for him instead of burying herself in work. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, like the powerful woman who had once sneered at me in front of a room full of rich people, had been replaced by someone who was quietly falling apart. I spent hours sitting outside Liam's door, talking to him softly, without expecting any response. I told him stories about Sophia, about small things that happened at school, about anything I thought might remind him that someone was still there waiting for him. My voice grew hoarse after a while, but I kept talking anyway. I didn't know if he could hear me or if he even cared, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. It felt important to keep the connection alive, even if it was only one-sided for now. That night, Emma saw how much patience and pain this process actually required. She had always been a woman who solved problems quickly and efficiently, someone who was used to getting results. But sitting there beside me on the cold floor outside her son's room, watching hour after hour pass with no change, she began to understand that this kind of healing couldn't be forced or rushed. I could see it in her face, the realization that love, in this case, meant waiting without any guarantee of when or if things would get better. She stayed with us the entire night, helping in whatever small way she could. She brought water and sat quietly when I needed a break from talking. She didn't try to take over or fix anything. She simply stayed. And in her own quiet way, she showed me that she was willing to sit in discomfort with us, instead of running from it like she had done so many times before. After weeks of slow and difficult progress with Liam, Emma came to me one evening with an offer I hadn't expected. She told me that she wanted to fully support Sophia's future, covering her education and any medical needs she might have. She said it calmly, without any dramatic gestures, but I could tell she had thought about it carefully. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. She had clearly been considering it for some time. She admitted she had completely misjudged me from the very beginning. One night, after the others had left, she told me that when she first saw me at the school event, she had assumed I was just another man looking for an easy way out. She said she had looked at my clothes, my job, and my silence, and decided I was someone who would take whatever was offered without question. Hearing her say that out loud hurt more than I expected, but there was no cruelty in her voice this time. Only honesty. I accepted her help but made it very clear that there would be no strings attached. I told her that if I was going to take her offer, it had to be on my terms. There would be no expectations, no favors owed, and no sense that I or Sophia were in her debt. I needed her to understand that this wasn't about becoming dependent on her. It was about giving Sophia a better chance, nothing more and nothing less. This moment marked a real turning point in her transformation. Something in the way she looked at me changed after that conversation. The woman who had once sneered at me in front of a room full of rich people was slowly being replaced by someone who was learning to see people differently. She didn't push back against my conditions or try to negotiate. She simply nodded and accepted what I had said, and for the first time, I felt like she was truly listening to me as an equal. Our relationship slowly started shifting from tension to something deeper and more respectful. The conversations between us became less guarded. There was still distance, but it was no longer filled with suspicion or pride. We began to speak more openly about Liam, about Sophia, and even about the small, ordinary things that made up our days. It wasn't friendship yet, and it certainly wasn't anything more. But it was something real. I was still careful, but I could feel the walls between us slowly coming down. I didn't trust her completely, and I wasn't sure if I ever would, but I could no longer pretend that she was the same cold, arrogant woman I had first met. As I drove home that night, I thought about how far we had come from that moment in the school auditorium when she had laughed at me in front of everyone. The road ahead was still uncertain, but something had changed between us, and I knew there was no going back to the way things used to be. Emma finally opened up about how guilty she felt for not being there when her husband was killed. It happened one quiet evening after Liam had fallen asleep. We were sitting in the large living room of her house, the only light coming from a small lamp on the side table. She had been quieter than usual all night, and when she finally spoke, her voice was low and unsteady. She told me that she had been away on a business trip the day it happened. She said she kept replaying in her mind what she could have done differently, even though she knew there was nothing she could have changed. She admitted that becoming cold and controlling was her way of never feeling that pain again. After her husband died, she had thrown herself into her work with a kind of desperation. She said it was easier to make decisions about money and power than to come home to a house that felt empty and a son who no longer spoke. She told me that she had convinced herself that if she stayed busy enough and remained in control of everything around her, she wouldn't have to feel how much she had lost. Her voice cracked as she said it, and for the first time since I had met her, she looked truly vulnerable. I shared my own fears about raising Sophia alone, and how I had emotionally shut down since losing my wife. I told her about the nights I had sat alone in the dark after Sophia fell asleep, feeling like I had failed as a husband and was failing as a father. I told her how I had learned to keep moving forward, to smile when I needed to, and to keep working even when I felt completely empty inside. I didn't try to make it sound noble or strong. I just told her the truth, the way it had really been for me. For the first time, we spoke as equals with nothing to prove to each other. There was no power between us in that moment, no CEO and no janitor, no rich woman and no struggling father. We were just two people who had both lost someone they loved and were trying, in our own broken ways, to keep going for the children who still needed us. The expensive furniture and the large, quiet house no longer seemed to matter. What mattered was the honesty that existed between us for the first time. She began spending genuine, relaxed time with both Liam and Sophia. She stopped rushing in and out with excuses. Instead, she would sit with them for longer periods, sometimes helping Sophia with her drawings, sometimes just sitting quietly near Liam while he played with the yo-yo. There was a softness in the way she interacted with him now, something that hadn't been there before. It wasn't forced or dramatic. It was quiet and careful, like she was learning how to be present again. I could see the old, arrogant and cold version of her slowly fading away. The woman who had once looked at me with disgust in my small, dirty garage was being replaced by someone who was learning to let her guard down, even if only a little at a time. It was in the way she spoke, the way she listened, and the way she no longer tried to control every moment. She was still Emma, but she was becoming someone different, someone who was willing to feel things again, instead of running from them. Emma told me she had developed real feelings for me and wanted to try building something together. It happened one quiet evening after Liam and Sophia had both fallen asleep. We were sitting on the back steps of the school, the night air cool against our skin. She didn't say it dramatically or with any big declarations. Her voice was soft, almost uncertain, like she had been carrying the words for a long time and was finally letting them out. She said she had been fighting against it for weeks, but she couldn't keep pretending that what she felt was only about Liam anymore. I was torn between my growing feelings and my strong need to protect Sophia from more emotional risk. Part of me wanted to believe that this could be something real, something good. But another part of me remembered how much pain I had already carried after losing my wife, and how carefully I had built walls around myself and my daughter. I kept thinking about what would happen if this didn't work out. I thought about how Sophia had already lost one parent, and how I couldn't bear the idea of her getting attached to someone only to lose them again. The conflict sat heavy in my chest for days. After many long and honest conversations with Sully, I decided to take a very slow and careful chance. He didn't push me one way or the other. He just listened as I talked through my fears, and then he reminded me that life doesn't come with guarantees. He told me that sometimes the only way to know if something is worth the risk is to take it, even if it's only a small step at a time. His words stayed with me, and after thinking about it for many nights, I finally made my decision. We started seeing each other privately and slowly, away from public eyes. There were no grand gestures or public announcements. We would meet after everyone had left the school, or sometimes at her house late in the evening when both children were asleep. We talked for hours about small things and difficult things, learning how to be around each other without the old tension that had once stood between us. It felt fragile, like something that could break if we moved too fast. Both Sophia and Liam began bonding with each other and with Emma in their own quiet ways. Sophia started showing Emma her drawings without being asked, and Liam began to relax more when she was around. It wasn't loud or obvious, but I could see the small changes. Sophia would sometimes ask about Emma when she wasn't there, and Liam would sit a little closer to her during their time together. Watching them slowly open up to her filled something in me that I hadn't realized was still empty. For the first time in years, things started feeling like a real family. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't loud, but there was a quiet sense of togetherness that I hadn't felt since before my wife passed away. The evenings felt less heavy. The silences felt less lonely. Even the school, with all its memories of that first humiliating night, began to feel like a place where something good could grow. I remained watchful, but a quiet hope was slowly growing inside me. I didn't let myself believe too quickly or too deeply, but I couldn't ignore the way things were changing. As I drove home one night with Sophia sleeping in the passenger seat beside me, I thought about how far we had all come from that moment when Emma had laughed at me in front of a room full of strangers. Whatever this was becoming, it was no longer just about helping Liam. It had become something that involved all of us, and even with all my caution, I couldn't help but feel that something real was beginning to take shape. Emma's old business partners started spreading rumors that she was losing focus because of her relationship with me. It began quietly at first, with whispers in board meetings and private conversations that somehow found their way into the news. People who had once respected her leadership were now questioning her judgment, saying that she was distracted and no longer fit to lead the company. The stories grew quickly, and soon it felt like everyone in her world was watching and waiting for her to fail. They began pressuring her to end things with me, claiming it was damaging the company's image and her leadership. Some of her closest business partners called her directly, warning her that being involved with someone like me would hurt her reputation and make investors nervous. They told her that people in her position were expected to keep their personal lives clean and simple, and that getting close to a school janitor with a struggling daughter was a mistake she couldn't afford to make. The pressure was constant and heavy, and it followed her everywhere she went. She had to make a very difficult choice between protecting her powerful position and standing by us. I could see the weight of it on her face during the days that followed. She would come to the school looking tired, her usual sharp confidence replaced by quiet exhaustion. She didn't talk about it much at first, but I could tell she was being pulled in two different directions. One part of her wanted to protect everything she had built over the years, while the other part was no longer willing to walk away from what we were slowly becoming. For the first time, I felt guilty about the damage I might be causing to her life and career. I had spent so long protecting myself and Sophia that I hadn't stopped to think about what this relationship might cost her. Watching her deal with the rumors and the pressure made me question whether I was being selfish by staying in her life. I started to wonder if walking away would be the kinder thing to do, even if it hurt. Despite everything, she stood firm and chose us, even when it cost her some powerful connections. She made it clear to her board and her old partners that she would not be told who she could care about or how she should live her life. Some people walked away because of it, and she lost support from people she had worked with for years. But she didn't back down. She chose us, even when it would have been easier and safer to let us go. Both Liam and Sophia continued to improve, though their progress remained slow and full of setbacks. There were good days when Liam would smile more easily, or Sophia would seem lighter than usual. But there were also difficult days when old fears would resurface without warning. Liam would sometimes go quiet again for no clear reason, and Sophia would have nights when she woke up anxious and needed me to sit with her until she fell back asleep. Healing, we were learning, was not a straight line. It moved in small steps, often followed by moments that made us feel like we were starting over. Emma and I had many honest, late-night conversations about grief, guilt, and learning to live again. We would sit together after the children had fallen asleep, sometimes at her house and sometimes on the old bench behind the school. She spoke about the years she had spent pretending to be strong while quietly falling apart inside. I told her about the way I had shut down after losing my wife, how I had learned to function without truly feeling much of anything. We didn't try to fix each other's pain, we simply sat with it, letting the words come out slowly in the quiet hours when the world felt smaller and safer. She admitted how empty and lonely her life had felt before she met us. She described coming home to a large, beautiful house that always felt cold, no matter how many lights she turned on. She said that success had given her everything except someone who truly saw her without wanting something in return. Her voice was soft when she spoke about it, and I could hear the years of isolation behind her words. It was the first time she had allowed herself to say out loud how much she had been carrying alone. I finally allowed myself to trust her completely and let my guard down. It didn't happen suddenly. It came gradually through her quiet consistency and the way she stayed even when things were difficult. For the first time since losing my wife, I stopped expecting her to leave. We slowly started building a real, quiet family life together. It wasn't through big gestures, but through small, ordinary moments, shared meals, quiet evenings, and the simple comfort of having someone there. The old tension between us began to fade. Both children started to thrive. Liam began laughing more freely, and the heavy silence around him slowly lifted. Sophia became more open and playful. They both seemed to feel safer, like they could finally just be children again. For the first time in years, the future started feeling hopeful. One evening, as I sat on the porch with Emma beside me and both children playing nearby, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. The kind that comes after a long storm when you finally believe the worst might be behind you. Just when things were beginning to feel steady, Liam had another major relapse. Without warning, he shut down completely. He stopped responding to the yo-yo, avoided eye contact, and refused to leave his room. It felt like all our progress had suddenly disappeared. Emma was devastated. She sat outside his door for hours, blaming herself and doubting whether she was capable of being a good mother. The powerful woman I once knew now looked broken, questioning everything about herself as she sat on the floor outside her son's room. I reminded her that healing is never a straight line, and that setbacks are part of the process. I told her that I had seen the same pattern with Sophia after we lost her mother. There were good weeks followed by difficult ones, and sometimes it felt like we were moving backward instead of forward. I said that Liam's silence didn't mean she had failed as a mother. It only meant that his pain was deeper than we had understood, and that it would take more time and patience than either of us had expected. We worked through this difficult period together without giving up on Liam. Every day I would sit outside his door for hours, speaking softly even when there was no response. Emma stayed with me most of the time, sometimes bringing food or water, sometimes just sitting in silence beside me. We didn't have any big solutions or dramatic breakthroughs. We simply refused to walk away. We stayed, even when it felt hopeless, because leaving would have been easier than continuing to show up with no guarantee that anything would change. This painful phase actually brought all four of us much closer than before. Something shifted during those long days and nights. Emma and I stopped holding back with each other. We spoke more honestly about our fears and our exhaustion. Sophia began checking on Liam in her own quiet way, leaving small drawings outside his door. Even Liam, though he remained silent, seemed to sense that we were not going anywhere. The walls that had once stood between all of us felt lower after that. We learned that real love and healing require patience, consistency, and staying even when it gets hard. There were no quick fixes or easy answers. There was only the daily choice to keep showing up, to keep speaking softly, and to keep believing that things could get better, even when there was no evidence of it yet. It was exhausting and often heartbreaking, but it was also the most honest kind of love I had ever known. Months later, something happened that none of us had dared to fully hope for. Liam laughed out loud for the first time in years while playing with the yo-yo. It was a quiet afternoon at Emma's house. He had been sitting on the floor, slowly moving the yo-yo up and down with that same careful focus he always had. Then, without any warning, a real, clear laugh escaped from him. It was short, almost surprised, like even he hadn't expected it. But it was there, and it filled the room in a way that nothing else ever had. Emma cried quietly as she watched her son laugh. It was the most genuine emotion I had ever seen from her. She didn't try to hide it or compose herself like she once would have. Tears ran down her face as she sat on the floor beside him, one hand covering her mouth as if she was afraid that any sound she made might break the moment. I had seen her angry, cold, powerful, and distant, but I had never seen her like this, completely open, completely vulnerable, and completely present. It was as if years of holding everything inside had finally found a way to release. Our unconventional family finally felt complete, stable, and strong. It wasn't the kind of family anyone would have expected. A school janitor, a powerful CEO, and 2 children who had both carried more pain than they should have at their age. But somehow, it worked. We had built something real through all the difficult days and quiet nights. There was no longer any question of whether we belonged together. We simply did. Emma stepped back from some of her company responsibilities to focus on healing and family. She didn't abandon her work completely, but she made it clear that her priorities had changed. She started leaving the office earlier and spending more evenings at home. She no longer measured her worth by how many deals she closed or how many hours she worked. Instead, she began measuring it by the small, ordinary moments she was now present for. Liam's laughter, Sophia's drawings, and the quiet evenings we spent together as a family. We had found something rare, real healing built on mutual respect, patience, and shared pain. It hadn't come easily or quickly. It had taken months of setbacks, difficult conversations, and quiet persistence. But what we had built together was stronger because of everything we had been through. As I sat on the porch one evening with Emma beside me and both children playing nearby, I felt a deep sense of gratitude settle over me. We hadn't just survived. We had found a way to heal together. A year later, Emma and I got married in a small private ceremony at the school where it all began. It felt right to return to the place where everything had started, the same hallways I had once mopped alone at night, the same auditorium where she had once laughed at me in front of everyone. There were no large crowds or expensive decorations, just a few close friends, Sully standing beside me, and both children with us as we said our vows in the quiet gymnasium under simple lights. It was simple, honest, and exactly what we needed. Sophia and Liam stood with us, both healthy, happy, and emotionally stronger than before. Sophia wore a small white dress and held a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked herself that morning. Liam stood quietly beside her, no longer hiding behind silence or fear. He still didn't speak much, but his eyes were brighter, and he smiled more easily now. Watching them stand there with us, I felt a deep sense of peace. They had both come so far from the scared, guarded children they once were. Emma quietly created a foundation to help traumatized and selectively mute children from low-income families. She didn't make a big announcement or seek attention for it. She simply used her resources to support children who were facing the same kind of pain Liam had gone through. She worked with doctors, therapists, and schools to make sure these children received the care and patience they needed. It became one of the most important things in her life, and she poured herself into it with the same focus she once gave only to her company. Years later, both children would often say that a simple $2 yo-yo changed their lives forever. Sophia would tell her friends the story with pride, describing how her father had used an old toy to help a boy who had forgotten how to smile. Liam, even as he grew older and began to speak more, would sometimes hold that same yo-yo in his hands and smile quietly to himself. It had become more than just a toy to all of us. It had become a symbol of patience, persistence, and the power of showing up even when there is no guarantee of success. Emma often said with a soft smile that the best decision she ever made was that arrogant offer she made that night. She would say it while watching the children play or while sitting beside me on quiet evenings. She never tried to take back the cruel way she had spoken to me in front of that room full of people. Instead, she chose to remember it as the moment that changed everything for the better. She often said that if she hadn't made that offer, she might never have found the family she didn't even know she needed. In the end, what started as a cruel public challenge became the beginning of deep healing, real love, and a second chance at life for all of us. We had all been broken in different ways when we first met, but through patience, honesty, and the willingness to stay even when things were difficult, we had built something stronger than any of us could have imagined alone. As I sat on the porch one evening years later, watching Emma laugh with Sophia and Liam, I felt a quiet gratitude settle over me. We hadn't just survived. We had found a way to truly live again, together.